Ever walked past a place with tombstones and wondered, is this a cemetery or a graveyard? We use these words all the time, often interchangeably, but they actually have distinct histories and meanings. Let's dig into the real difference. You might be surprised by what you learn. It's a story that takes us from ancient languages all the way to the bustling cities of the 19th century. So, stick around. First, let's talk about where the words come from. The word graveyard is pretty straightforward. It comes from Old English combining graf, which means grave or ditch, and geared, meaning yard or enclosure. So, a graveyard is literally an enclosed area with graves. Simple, right? But cemetery has a much more poetic origin. It comes from the Greek word koimeterion, which means a sleeping place or dormitory. This reflects a beautiful belief that the deceased are not truly gone, but are merely sleeping, waiting for a future resurrection. So right from the etymology, we see a difference in tone. One is a practical description. The other is more spiritual and hopeful. Now, let's travel back to the Middle Ages. During this period, Christian tradition dictated that the dead should be buried in consecrated ground. This led to the rise of churchyards. Essentially, these were the yards surrounding a church, and they became the primary burial sites for the community. These churchyards are what we would typically call graveyards. They were directly attached to a church, managed by the church, and were a central part of the town or village's spiritual life. If you see a burial ground right next to an old church, you're looking at a classic graveyard. For centuries, this system worked. But then came the 19th century and the Industrial Revolution. Cities like London and Paris exploded in population. Suddenly, the small church graveyards were completely overwhelmed. They became overcrowded, unsanitary, and frankly, a public health hazard. There was literally no more room to bury the dead. This crisis led to a major innovation, the rural cemetery movement. Visionaries decided to create new burial grounds outside of the city limits. These weren't just functional spaces. They were designed to be beautiful, park-like landscapes. Think rolling hills, winding paths, beautiful trees, and elaborate monuments. These new, large, standalone burial grounds, not attached to any specific church, were called cemeteries. Père Lachaise in Paris is a famous early example, and it inspired similar garden cemeteries all over the world, including in the United States. So, this brings us to the key distinctions. The number one difference is location. A graveyard is adjacent to a church. A cemetery is a standalone burial ground, not attached to a church and often located on the outskirts of a town or city. Secondly, size and management. Graveyards are typically smaller and are managed by the associated church. Cemeteries are much larger, can be publicly or privately owned, and are open to people of all faiths or even no faith. They are non-denominational by design. And finally, there's the cultural connotation we touched on earlier. Graveyard can sometimes have a slightly spookier, older feel, tied to Gothic imagery and old parish churches. Cemetery, on the other hand, often evokes a more modern, serene, and park-like image. It's a place for quiet reflection and remembrance, as much as it is a place for burial. So, to sum it all up, while we use both words to talk about places where people are buried, there's a clear historical and practical difference. A graveyard is a small old burial ground attached to a church. A cemetery is a larger, often park-like burial ground that stands on its own. The shift from graveyards to cemeteries tells a fascinating story of urbanization, public health, and changing attitudes towards death and remembrance. It's a move from a small, church-focused yard to a grand, secular sleeping place. Next time you pass a burial ground, take a closer look. Is there a church right next to it? Or is it a vast, sprawling park of tombstones? Now, you'll know exactly what to call it. It's a small piece of history hidden in plain sight. Thanks for watching. If you found this interesting, give this video a like and subscribe for more deep dives into the stories behind the words we use every day. See you in the next one.